Hello, this is going to be a video about edges in networks. In other words, the relationships between people. And so we're talking in social networks. Why do people form relationships? Why do people form edges, in other words? So I'm going to talk about three different types of explanations for why relationships form. First is psychological explanations, and then strategic explanations, and exposure explanations. There are explanations outside of these. There are people who would categorize them very differently than I do, but this should give you a general sense of a number of important explanations for relationships. And by this, I mean this very broadly. There are obviously romantic relationships, which are sort of outside the scope of what I'll be talking about. But some of what we'll be talking about touches on those as well. So let's start with psychological explanations. So one explanation is that we are comfortable with people like us. So this is called homophily. You can think of homophily as being both an explanation and an outcome. So when we look at human social networks, we see that they are, by much more than we would expect by chance, people are more likely to be connected to others who are like them, who are similar to them. And you can think of a number of different dimensions, from race to class to interests, hobbies, lots of different ways. People are more likely, people are more likely to be connected to people who are similar to them. And the more dimensions you're similar to someone, the more likely you are to be connected to them. So that's sort of the outcome. We can think of this also as an explanation that if it's possible that the reason for this is simply because people who are like each other are more likely to become friends. If you know two people, you meet two new people in class and one of them has all the same interests as you, then you will be more comfortable talking with them, right? There's lots of different reasons we can think that it makes sense that you'd be more likely to be friends with someone who's like you. So that's homophily. And maybe I should include as a caveat at the beginning, most of these explanations are not, they are complementary. They are not in contention with one another and not exclusive. So that's one explanation. So if we have, A, B, and C, we'll come back to A, B, and C a few times in this lecture. So B and C are, we're considering among all the dimensions of people, they're similar along this dimension that we're coloring them the same note, same color, and A we're coloring a different color. So they are Purdue black and A is Purdue gold. Maybe this is whether they like basketball or football, or whether they, are a communication major or an engineering major. And so homophily would tell us that if we knew nothing else about these people, we would expect that B and C would be more likely to be friends than C and A or B and A. The second psychological concept or explanation is that we want our relationships to be balanced, to be in balance. So this is called balance theory. There are some colloquial idioms that I guess colloquial phrases. I don't know the word I'm looking for, but that relate to this. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That is one kind of explication of balance theory. Or another version of balance theory is that the friend of my enemy is also my enemy. So imagine B and C and A, we have them again, but instead now B and C are enemies and B and A are enemies, then we would expect that A and C could be friends. On the other hand, if instead of the black represented enemyship, it represented friendship, that A and B were friends and B and C were friends, but somehow A and C were enemies, then balance theory would tell us that something is going to change, that this is an unstable set of relationships. So that either the valence will change, so instead of being, that if C continues to be friends with A, B can't stand it, and they now become enemies with C, right? That that relationship changes, or B and A are no longer or B and C no longer are friends, or B and C no longer are friends. Any of those sorts of balance balances could work out. Of course, this is dependent on the type of ties. So, for example, friendship, you can have 3 friends. A and B and C can all be friends. But on the other hand, if A is in love with B and B is in love with C, C and C is in love with A, then we can have trouble, right? That this could cause trouble. So these sorts of, love triangles are related to this balance theory as well. So those are a few psychological explanations for why people have the sorts of relationships that you have. And I'll say one, kind of quick aside about balance theory is you can see how this could cascade through a network, right? And many, we've all probably been in, had an experience where some, maybe there's 2 people in our friend group who are in a romantic relationship with each other, and the romantic relationship sours, right? So instead of A and B being, being friends or lovers, that they become enemies with each other, and it very quickly throws into chaos all of the other relationships, right? That they either fragment, breaks apart a friend group, or one or the other of the couple is often ostracized because we want these triangles to be in balance. It just does not work for us to be very good friends with 2 people who now really dislike each other. Okay, so that's psychological explanations, strategic explanations. So these are the big ideas that we want to be in relationships that help us or that may help us in the future. And this sounds kind of crass, but I think that it's fine. Like many of our relationships, it makes sense for this to be sort of a basis of them. So part of this is called social exchange theory. This hypothesizes that we sort of are continually asking ourselves if the benefits of a relationship outweigh the costs. And those could be emotional costs or literal or financial costs or time costs. Again, it sounds crass, but I think it makes sense that we can think about whether we are getting things out of a relationship that we are putting a lot into. And so we can think about the resources that each node has and needs, and whether people are complementary, whether they, you can provide the needs for someone and they can provide other needs for you, etc. A related theory is called social capital theory. It is a little more abstract. It's less about dyads and individual relationships and more about the idea that we try to gain power in a network. So social capital, we'll talk a lot more about this in the class, but that people try to, social capital is the idea that we can gain resources or opportunities through our relationships. And so, one thing that people do is try to make relationships with powerful others to obtain powerful positions in the network. So there's this idea of holes in a network, structural holes, which means that there are sort of 2 groups that are otherwise unconnected except for the person in the middle. And the person in the middle has power because they can sort of control the information that flows between the groups. And so that's one version of what it might look like to gain social capital. That instead of social exchange theory, which says that you need to get a benefit from the individual relationships that you have, social capital theory in this context would mean that you're trying to kind of connect to anyone in this group and anyone in this group, because what you want is to be in that hole in the network. So those are some kind of high-level strategic reasons that we might create a relationship. You can think of this, another version maybe of social capital is like trying to connect to a company, right? An organization that you don't care so much about which person in an organization, but you sort of want to connect to someone in that organization so that you can get the, some resources or knowledge or information or opportunities from the organization itself. Okay, so another version, again, complementary explanation, are exposure explanations. And these are just that we are exposed to other people, being around other people that time spent near someone is a good explanation for a relationship. I guess that's how I would put it. So one of these is called transitivity or triadic closure, and that's that we become friends with our friends, our friends' friends, so the friends of our friends. So this has, again, like homophily, is both an outcome and one explanation for that outcome. So the outcome is that we often see that when there's a triangle like this, if A is connected to B and B is connected to C, then A and C, I thought I had a drawing there that connected, and A and C are much more likely to be connected than we would expect by chance. So if, for example, there was D over here, D is hanging out over here, not connected to anyone, it'd be much more likely that A, the next time step, our next measurement, that A would connect to C than that A would connect to D or to other people. So like homophily, there's this, the simple explanation is just that we hang out. If I'm hanging out with B and B is hanging out with C, then I'll be hanging out with C, right? And if the more I hang out with C, the more likely I am to get to know them and become friends with them. So this is there's this exposure version of the argument. There's also other explanations for why we might see this. I'll talk about one in just a second. But homophily is also an explanation, because if I am friends with B because they're similar to me, and B is friends with C because they're similar to B, well then A is probably similar to C also, right? And so if A and C meet each other, then they're likely to become friends because they're probably like each other because they're both like B. Hopefully that makes sense. So that is that's the idea of triadic closure or transitivity. A related idea is focus or foci of activity. So this is Scott Feld wrote this article, which is partially a pushback against some of these other explanations, and I guess the idea of these dyadic explanations. So dyad meaning like thinking about one person becoming friends with one other person. And his big argument is really that we are in these foci of activity, that we are doing things out in the world in which we are with a lot of other people. Some of these we choose, some we're forced into. So our neighborhoods, we kind of choose. The classes that we take, again, we kind of choose. The clubs we belong to, the church we go to. Like there are all these places where we are with other people, and that really that is the time. That's the reason that we have a lot of our relationships are because we are in these larger groups, which are sort of independent of dyads. They aren't really about dyads. They're about doing something else. Whether it's your hobby or going about your business in your neighborhood or going to class, and so that is the source of our relationships. And that, this is, of course, again, complementary. That's sort of recursive, that then as we build individual level, dyadic level relationships with people, we are then more likely to do other things with those people that we have relationships with, right? We might, start a book club together or something like that. But his big argument is that the ties are often a function of activities and not dyadic choices that we can explain. For example, homophily is very easy to explain. It's easy to explain why all of my friends are Christians if I met all of them in a Christian church, right? It's not that I like the Christians more, or I'm more likely to become a friend with someone because they're Christian. It's that we do the same thing together. So of course we're going to be the same along that dimension. If all my friends are jugglers, well, I met them all at juggling camp. It kind of makes sense that's where that there would be homophily if it's along these dimensions. Same with transitivity, right? It makes sense that my friends are friends with each other because we were all in the same group together. So that's sort of the argument, is that some of these structures can come about because of a foci of activity. So, those are sort of the three main conceptual tie formation ideas I wanted to get across. Hopefully that is helpful, and talk to you soon.